"Get off this plane now!" the flight attendant barked, pointing at the stunned young black girl. Passengers gasped as the girl clutched her boarding pass, her voice trembling as she protested, "But this is my seat!" The attendant's face twisted with disdain, dismissing her words entirely. What no one in the crew knew was that the girl wasn't just any passenger. Her family held the power to bring this airline to its knees. In just minutes, the tables would turn, and the humiliating scene unfolding before everyone's eyes would spark a retaliation no one on board could have imagined. She was embarrassed and made to leave her seat, but within moments, the same flight attendant who had called her out faced repercussions no one saw coming. The events of this flight would alter everything, not only for those on board, but for the entire airline. Before diving in, drop a comment with your location and let us know if you enjoy these kinds of stories. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. Emma Williams stepped onto the plane with a quiet confidence that turned a few heads. She wore a tailored blazer paired with a sleek dress, her natural curls framing her face perfectly. In one hand, she carried a leather laptop bag, and in the other, her boarding pass. Moving down the aisle, she scanned seat numbers with an air of calm composure. Her expression unshaken and focused. Her demeanor hinted at someone who wasn't easily rattled. Reaching her seat in first class, she gave the passenger beside her a polite nod, stowed her bag in the overhead compartment, and took her seat, pulling out a small notebook and pen. She began jotting notes, her attention firmly on her task. Though a few passengers glanced away with curiosity, Emma remained oblivious, focused entirely on her work. Moments later, Samantha Turner, a flight attendant, entered the cabin with brisk, purposeful strides. Samantha, dressed immaculately in her crisp uniform, had a sharp gaze that seemed to evaluate every passenger she passed. Her eyes locked on Emma, and she hesitated for a moment as though something about her required extra scrutiny. With her expression tightening, Samantha approached, stopping right beside Emma's seat. "Excuse me," she said, her voice polite but with an unmistakable edge. "May I see your boarding pass?" "Please?" Emma looked up, mildly surprised but completely composed, and handed over her ticket with a small, polite smile. "Of course," she replied. Samantha examined the pass, a slight frown forming on her face. "This is for first class," she stated. Emma's calm reply was simple. "That's correct." Samantha's frown deepened as, though trying to reconcile something in her mind after a pause, she returned the boarding pass without comment. Her lips pressed into a tight line without further acknowledgement. She walked away, though her body language suggested she wasn't letting the matter go. Emma returned to her notes, unfazed by the interaction. Emma's pen continued to glide over the paper as she remained engrossed in her writing, unaware that Samantha was now quietly speaking to another flight attendant near the galley. Their occasional glances in Emma's direction, coupled with Samantha's tense expression, suggested a growing unease. After a few moments, Samantha reappeared, her stance more authoritative. "Miss Carter," she said firmly, "could you step aside for a moment? I need to verify something." Emma blinked, surprised but collected, and stood up with her laptop bag in hand, following Samantha toward the galley. The passengers in first class exchanged curious looks, their whispers becoming more audible as they speculated on what was happening. Emma remained calm, standing in the narrow space as Samantha addressed her again. "I'm going to have to ask you to move to a different seat," Samantha said, folding her arms. "It seems there was a mistake with your booking." Emma tilted her head slightly, her brows knitting in confusion. "A mistake? That's strange. I booked this ticket weeks ago, and it was confirmed. Could you check again?" Emma's tone was steady, but Samantha's response was curt. "I already checked. This seat isn't appropriate for you," she said coldly. "You'll need to move to the main cabin." Words hung heavily in the air, and for the first time a flicker of disbelief and irritation crossed Emma's face before she quickly masked it. "I don't understand," Emma said, her voice still calm. "My ticket is valid. Why would I need to move?" Samantha leaned in slightly, her tone dropping to a sharp whisper. I don't have time to explain either. You move or I'll have to call security to assist. Emma's eyes narrowed briefly before she nodded, keeping her expression neutral as she returned to her seat to gather her belongings. By now, the entire first-class cabin was watching the murmurs growing louder as Emma walked down the aisle, Samantha close behind her. Though Emma held her head high, the subtle tightening of her grip on her laptop bag betrayed her frustration reaching the main cabin. Samantha gestured toward a middle-row seat. Emma took one look before placing her bag beneath the seat and sitting down. Without a word, Emma adjusted her position in the cramped seat, her face calm but her thoughts visibly racing. Samantha walked away without further comment, leaving Emma to settle into the less comfortable spot. Emma stared out the window, her expression neutral, though a faint tension lingered in her posture. After a moment, she pulled out her phone, her fingers moving swiftly as she typed a message when she hit send. A faint smile played at the corners of her lips, subtle but knowing, ignoring the curious glances and whispered conversations around her. Emma scrolled through her contacts and made a quick call. Her voice was low and firm as she spoke, her tone carrying a quiet authority. "Hi, it's me." She began, her calm demeanor belying the frustration simmering beneath the surface. "I need a favor. Something happened, and I'd like it addressed immediately." "Yes, I'm still on the plane. No need to escalate yet. Just watch for my signal." She ended the call as quickly as she had started it, slipping the phone back into her bag. Her composure was unnerving, almost as if she had knowledge that others didn't. Meanwhile, back in first class, Samantha continued her duties with a sense of satisfaction, checking on passengers, offering polite smiles, and making sure drinks were served, yet her thoughts kept drifting back to Emma. There was something about her poise that unsettled Samantha, though she couldn't pinpoint exactly why. As far as Samantha was concerned, she had handled the situation appropriately, but a nagging doubt lingered at the back of her mind in the main cabin. Emma glanced at Jessica, a younger flight attendant assigned to the section. Unlike Samantha, Jessica seemed to have more empathy in her approach. She walked toward Emma, carefully holding a cup of water. "Mom, is everything okay?" Jessica asked softly, her voice filled with concern. Emma looked up, offering a brief but warm smile. "I'm fine. Thank you," she replied. Jessica hesitated, sensing there was more to the story, but Emma's unruffled demeanor discouraged further questioning. "Let me know if you need anything," Jessica said, placing the water on Emma's tray before stepping away as the flight continued. Samantha remained oblivious to the ripple effect her actions had set in motion. Emma, on the other hand, was entirely in control. Leaning back in her seat, she watched the clouds outside the window, her fingers tapping rhythmically on her armrest. Her calm exterior masked the storm brewing beneath the surface. Emma wasn't the type to let an injustice slide, but she didn't lose. Her temper, either precision, not chaos, was her approach, and she had already set her plan into motion. 7 minutes later, a voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to thank you for flying with us today. We hope you're enjoying your flight. If there's anything you need, don't hesitate to let one of our crew members know." Emma's eyes flicked toward the front of the plane, her expression unreadable. She pulled out her notebook again, jotting down a single line before snapping it shut with determination. Whatever her next move was, it was clear she was prepared. The cabin had settled into a quiet rhythm, with passengers engrossed in books, movies, or quiet conversation. Emma remained still, her expression calm, but carrying an intensity that hinted at something waiting to unfold. Meanwhile, Samantha appeared more at ease, moving through her routine with practiced ease. She glanced at the first-class section as she served drinks, feeling a small sense of victory to her. The issue had been resolved, and any discomfort it caused was now behind them. But the past, as she would soon learn, was far from forgotten. Emma leaned slightly forward in her seat, unlocking her phone again. Her fingers hovered over the screen before typing a short, cryptic message. "They'll call. Soon, let me know when it's done." She hit send, the faint glow of her phone casting a calm light on her composed face. The message went unnoticed by the surrounding passengers, who were either distracted or uninterested. Emma's lips curled into a subtle smile, but her eyes remained sharp enough that Samantha would have found them unsettling if she had noticed at the front of the plane. Samantha approached to the galley and exchanged a few words with Dennis, an older, seasoned flight attendant who often mentored younger crew members. Samantha leaned in, her voice low. "Did you see that woman earlier?" she asked. Glancing subtly in Emma's direction, Dennis raised an eyebrow. "Which one? The one I moved to economy?" Samantha clarified. She had a first-class ticket, but something about her didn't sit right with me. She just seemed out of place. Dennis frowned, leaning against the galley counter, out of place. "What do you mean?" Samantha hesitated, realizing she needed to tread carefully. "I just had a gut feeling it's better to be cautious than sorry, right?" Dennis is. Frown deepened. A gut feeling doesn't justify moving someone without cause. Did she do anything wrong? Samantha opened her mouth to respond, but Dennis cut her off with a sharp look. "You'd better hope this doesn't come back to bite you. Samantha, first-class passengers don't take kindly to being moved, and neither does the airline." Before Samantha could respond, the in-flight phone buzzed. Dennis picked it up, his expression neutral as he listened. A moment later, his brow followed, and he glanced at Samantha, a mix of curiosity and concern in his eyes. "It's for you," he said, handing her the phone. "They're asking for you by name." Samantha's heart skipped a beat. She hesitated before taking the phone, her fingers tightening around the receiver. "This is Samantha," she said cautiously. The voice on the other end was calm but firm. "This is the airline's executive office. We've received a direct complaint about an incident involving a first-class passenger. We'll need you to provide a detailed report upon landing. For now, ensure all passengers are treated respectfully and refrain from further altering seating arrangements without proper justification." Samantha's face paled slightly as the weight of those words sank in. "Yes, of course," she stammered. "I'll make sure everything is handled appropriately." As she hung up, her hand trembled ever so slightly. Dennis watched her closely, his expression unreadable. "What's going on?" "Nothing," Samantha muttered, but the nervous edge in her voice betrayed her. She glanced toward the main cabin where Emma sat, her calm figure now carrying an entirely different significance. For the first time, Samantha felt a flicker of unease. Emma, seated quietly with her notebook closed on her lap, seemed oblivious to the phone call, but as Samantha returned to her duties, Emma's lips curved into the faintest smile. She had just started turning the tide, and Samantha was only beginning to realize the storm heading her way. Samantha tried to shake off her unease as she moved through the cabin, but the phone call lingered in her mind like a shadow. Samantha forced herself to focus, smiling at passengers and performing her duties with robotic precision. Yet her gaze kept drifting toward Emma, who sat quietly in the main cabin, unbothered and calm. It was unsettling the way Emma seemed so composed, as though she knew something Samantha didn't mean. While Emma leaned back in her seat, glancing at her watch, she crossed her legs and picked up the in-flight magazine, flipping through it absent-mindedly to anyone watching. She looked relaxed, as though nothing about her day had been disrupted, but inside her mind, every step of her plan was unfolding exactly as she had intended. The flight attendant, Jessica, approached Emma again, her kind demeanor a stark contrast to Samantha's earlier hostility. "Excuse me, ma'am," Jessica said softly. "Would you like anything to drink? Maybe a snack?" Emma looked up, offering a polite smile. "Just water, please." Jessica nodded and returned moments later with a cup of water and a small napkin. She placed them gently on Emma's tray table. "If there's anything else you need, let me know," she added kindly. Emma's eyes softened. "Thank you, Jessica," she said, glancing at her name tag. Her tone was warm and her gratitude genuine. Jessica gave a small smile and walked away. Leaving Emma to her thoughts, Samantha watched the exchange from afar, her unease growing. The way Emma interacted with Jessica, so poised and polite, didn't match the narrative Samantha had built in her mind. It bothered her more than she cared to admit. She felt an inexplicable urge to reassert control over the situation. But she knew she had to tread carefully now. The call from the executive office had made that clear as the plane cruised at 30,000 feet. The hum of the engines provided a steady backdrop to the tension building in Samantha's chest. She made her way to the galley again, where Dennis was busy preparing the next round of refreshments. "Everything okay?" Dennis asked, glancing at her. Samantha hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, fine," she said curtly, but Dennis wasn't convinced. He leaned closer, his voice low. "Look, whatever's going on, you'd better hope you didn't mess with the wrong passenger. First class isn't for amateurs. Samantha, these people have connections." Samantha stiffened at his words but said nothing. Instead, she busied herself with arranging cups. Though her mind was far from the task, Dennis's warning had struck a nerve. Who was Emma Williams, really? And why did she feel like she had misjudged her at the same time? Emma's phone buzzed quietly in her lap. She glanced down at the screen, her expression unreadable. The message was short, "All set, they're monitoring." Emma slid the phone back into her bag without a word and took a sip of water. Her movements were deliberate, calm, and unhurried, as if she had all the time in the world. The subtle tension between Emma and Samantha wasn't lost on a few observant passengers. A man across the aisle from Emma leaned over slightly and whispered, "That flight attendant has been giving you a hard time, hasn't she?" Emma looked at him, her expression neutral. "It's nothing I can't handle," she replied softly. The man raised an eyebrow, sensing there was more to the story, but he didn't push further. Emma turned her gaze back to the window, watching the endless stretch of clouds. Her calm exterior masked the quiet satisfaction she felt the gears were turning, and Samantha had no idea how far-reaching the consequences of her actions would be back in the first-class section. Samantha felt her unease deepen. Every passing minute seemed to stretch endlessly. The weight of the earlier phone call pressing on her. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen, something she wouldn't be able. To control the atmosphere in the cabin grew heavier with each passing minute, though the plane itself remained steady in its flight. Samantha's movements were more rigid now, her once confident stride replaced with nervous glances. She tried to keep herself busy checking seatbelts and distributing drinks, but her mind kept returning to Emma every time Samantha glanced toward the main cabin. Emma seemed as calm as ever, sitting with an air of... She continued to gaze out of the window, occasionally jotting something down in her notebook. Her actions seemed so mundane, yet there was an undercurrent of purpose to everything she did. Passengers seated nearby couldn't help but notice her composure contrasting sharply with Samantha's growing unease. Whispers began circulating among them. Though no one dared to speak openly about the tension, Samantha's discomfort reached a breaking point when Dennis approached her in the galley again. He handed her a folded note, his expression unreadable. "The captain wants to see you," he said quietly. "What? Why?" Samantha asked, her voice sharper than intended. Dennis shrugged, though there was a faint edge of disapproval in his gaze. He didn't say, "Just go," reluctantly. Samantha made her way toward the cockpit as she stepped in the door, closed behind her, sealing her off from the cabin. Captain Harris, a middle-aged man with a calm yet authoritative demeanor, turned to face her. His co-pilot glanced briefly at her before returning his attention to the controls. "Samantha," Captain Harris began, his tone measured. "We've received another call from the executive office." Samantha's heart sank. "Sir, right." The captain held up a hand, cutting her off. "This is serious. The passenger you moved, Miss Emma Williams, is not just any passenger. She's connected to the airline's board of directors. We're under direct orders to ensure she's treated with the utmost respect for the remainder of the flight." Samantha's mouth went dry. "I didn't know," she stammered. "I thought, did you think Captain Harris?" interrupted, his voice growing firmer. "Or did you assume, because from where I'm sitting it looks like you acted without cause? That's unacceptable." Samantha opened her mouth to defend herself, but no words came. The captain sighed, rubbing his temples. Here's what's going to happen. You'll return to your duties and ensure there are no further incidents when we land. You'll provide a full report to the ground team. Until then, do not approach Miss Carter unless absolutely necessary. Is that clear? Yes, sir. Samantha whispered, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. The captain nodded toward the door. Dismissed, Samantha left the cockpit, her mind racing. She returned to the galley where Dennis gave her a questioning look. She ignored him instead, grabbing a tray of drinks and forcing herself to move through the cabin. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured coffee for a passenger in first class. Spilling a few drops onto the tray, she cursed under her breath, quickly wiping it away. Back in the main cabin, Emma remained undisturbed, her every action deliberate and measured as Samantha passed by. Emma glanced up briefly, her eyes locking with Samantha for a split second. There was no malice in her gaze, only an unsettling calmness, as if she knew exactly how this would end. Samantha quickened her pace, retreating to the galley once more. For the first time in her career, she felt completely out of control, and she hated it. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Samantha's steps faltered as she returned to the galley, her breathing uneven. She tried to focus on the tasks at hand, but the captain's words echoed in her mind. She's connected to the board. The phrase hit her like a punch to the gut. How could she have overlooked something so important? Samantha prided herself on her instincts, but now those same instincts seemed to have betrayed her. She leaned against the counter, her hands gripping the edge tightly. Dennis watched her from the corner of his eye as he finished arranging the snack cart. "Are you going to tell me what's going on?" he asked, his tone cautious but curious. Eva pulled her phone from her bag and quickly typed another short message, then slipped it back into her purse, settling deeper into her seat, with a sense of ease. Her calm was unbroken around her. The other passengers were starting to take notice. The man sitting across the aisle from her, who tried talking to her earlier, leaned in slightly, his voice low. "Are you sure you're all right?" The flight attendant seemed pretty shaken up back there. Ava offered a small, polite smile, her tone unwavering. "I appreciate your concern, but everything's under control." He nodded, but still seemed uncertain, clearly impressed by Eva's composed demeanor, though still wondering if there was more to her than met the eye. Meanwhile, in the front of the plane, Samantha was still trying to regain her balance. She moved through first class, offering forced smiles to the passengers, but her mind was in a whirl. The thought that Ava might have powerful ties to the airline's board was unsettling enough, but how she had handled the entire situation made Samantha uneasy. Ava never lost her composure, never raised her voice. The calm control she exuded was something rare, even remarkable. Samantha made her way back to the galley to prepare for the next round of service. The soft chime of an announcement bell filled the cabin. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Steady and professional, ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We want to thank you for flying with us today. The flight is progressing smoothly, and we're on schedule for an on-time arrival. Please continue to enjoy your flight, and as always, let us know if you need anything." The announcement was routine, but to Samantha it felt like a reminder of how much she had already miscalculated. She glanced again toward the main cabin, her eyes landing on Ava. To her surprise, Ava met her gaze for just a moment, offering a barely perceptible nod. It wasn't confrontational, just a calm acknowledgement of their shared space. That one small gesture was enough to send a chill down Samantha's spine. Whatever Eva Carter was planning, it was clear now that Samantha wasn't prepared for it. The engine hums filled the air, but the tension between them was undeniable. Samantha struggled to focus on her tasks, but everything felt mechanical. Her thoughts were consumed by the growing unease she couldn't shake. Though she tried to avoid looking toward the front, she couldn't help but feel the weight of Eva's presence, as though the calm young woman was quietly plotting something. Just out of view in the main cabin, Ava remained the picture of serenity. She glanced at her watch, then the small screen on the seat in front of her, noting the flight's progress. A fleeting smile crossed her face, but disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. She leaned forward, pulling out a notebook, and began writing. Her handwriting was neat, deliberate, and each word seemed carefully chosen to anyone else. It would have looked like a typical moment of a passenger passing time, but forever it was part of a larger, meticulous plan. Back in the galley, Samantha's discomfort deepened. She leaned against the counter with her arms crossed tightly, trying to steady herself. Dennis, who had been watching her for most of the flight, finally broke the silence. "You've been tense since that phone call," he said, his tone low but firm. "What's really going on?" Samantha hesitated, glancing at the curtain that separated the galley from the main cabin. "I told you already," she muttered. "The passenger I moved has connections, big ones." Dennis raised an eyebrow big enough for the captain to get involved. "That's not just connections, Samantha, that's a warning. What did you do to her?" "I didn't do anything," Samantha snapped, though her defensive tone gave her away. "You moved her out of first class," Dennis interrupted sharply, "and now you're paying for it. Look, I've been with this airline for years. If you pissed off someone with real power, you better be ready for the fallout. People like that. Don't let things slide." Samantha clenched her jaw, frustration building. What was I supposed to do? She didn't seem like someone who belongs in first class. Dennis cut her off like someone who could afford to fly like everyone else up there. Samantha went silent, her grip on the counter tightening until her knuckles went white. Dennis shook his head with a heavy sigh. "You should have left her alone. Now you've made a mess that's bigger than you can handle." As Dennis returned to his duties, Samantha felt panic rising. She knew he was right, but there was no undoing her actions. She glanced once more toward the main cabin, her heart pounding. Ava was still sitting quietly. Her notebook was now closed and tucked away, and the faint smile she had earlier was gone, replaced by a look of quiet determination. Just then, the chime for an incoming call sounded. Samantha's pulse quickened, but it was only the galley phone. She grabbed at her hand, slightly trembling. "Galley. This is Samantha," she said, trying to study her voice. "This is the captain," came the response on the other end. "We've received another communication from the executive office. They've requested that Miss Carter receive full priority service for the remainder of the flight, ensure she's comfortable, and personally apologize for any inconvenience earlier." Samantha felt her breath catch in her throat. "Yes, sir," she replied, barely able to get the words out before hanging up. She stood frozen for a moment, the weight of the request sinking in. This wasn't just a request, it was a direct order and one she couldn't ignore. Summoning what little composure she had left, Samantha braced herself to approach Eva again. This time she knew the balance of power had shifted completely. Whatever happened next, Samantha understood that she no longer had control over the situation. She left the galley, carefully holding a glass of sparkling water on a tray that now felt heavier than ever. Her usual poise was gone, replaced with visible tension as she moved toward the main cabin. Each step felt like it carried the weight of her earlier decisions pressing down on her like a stone. She knew this wasn't about delivering water anymore. It was a silent admission that she had crossed a line when she reached Eva's seat. She hesitated, her hands shaking as she held the tray. Eva looked up, her expression unreadable. The air between them thickened as Samantha managed a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Miss Carter," she began, her voice lower than anyone on the flight had heard it before. "I want to personally apologize for any inconvenience earlier. It was a misunderstanding on my part," she added quickly. Ava tilted her head slightly, her gaze sharp and unflinching. "A misunderstanding," she repeated softly but firmly. Samantha's smile faltered, but she pressed on. "Yes. I didn't mean to disrupt your experience. Please accept this as a token of apology." She placed the glass of sparkling water on the tray table with a slight tremble in her hand. Ava glanced at the glass for a moment before looking back at Samantha. "Thank you," she said simply, her tone neutral. "But I think it's going to take more than a drink to fix this." The soft words hit Samantha like a slap. Her throat tightening as she struggled to keep her composure, she swallowed hard, her palms sweating. Of course, she stammered, "If there's anything else I can do to make this right, please let me know." Eva didn't answer immediately. Instead, she leaned back in her seat, studying Samantha with a cool, appraising gaze. The silence stretched on just long enough to make Samantha squirm. Finally, Eva smiled faintly, not in satisfaction, but in quiet confidence. "I appreciate your effort," she said, her voice steady. "But I believe the airline will handle this matter appropriately after we land." Samantha's stomach dropped. The mention of the airline made it clear that Emma wasn't letting this go. I understand," Samantha murmured, lowering her eyes. "If you need anything else, don't hesitate to ask without waiting for a response." Samantha turned and walked back to the galley as quickly as she could. Without running, her face burned with humiliation, and her mind raced with the implications of Eva's words. It was clear now that the situation was far from over, and whatever came next was completely out of her hands. Emma, meanwhile, picked up the glass of sparkling water and took a slow sip. She set it down with the same composed expression, giving nothing away to the passengers around her. She appeared as calm as ever, but inside Emma knew the power dynamic had completely shifted in her favor. Back in the galley, Dennis raised an eyebrow as he watched Samantha slump against the counter, her face pale. "How did it go?" he asked. Samantha shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "She's not done. She's going to take this all the way," Dennis said with a heavy sigh, his expression grim. "I told you, people like her don't mess around. You should have seen." This coming, Samantha stayed silent instead, her gaze fixed on the curtain dividing the galley from the rest of the cabin, her mind whirling. It finally hit her that Emma Williams wasn't just another flyer. She was someone with way more influence than Samantha had ever realized, and now she was paying the price for underestimating her. Samantha stayed in the galley, replaying the flight in her head. She'd never felt so insignificant or vulnerable in all the years with the airline. Dennis moved around quietly, occasionally glancing at her with concern but saying nothing. He clearly understood how serious things were and how out of her depth Samantha had become. Meanwhile, in the main cabin, Emma shut her notebook with deliberate care and stowed it back in her bag. Emma straightened her posture, sitting tall, poised like she was preparing for something. The faint bars of conversations around her filled her ears, but she paid them no mind. Her focus was unwavering. Every motion, precise moments later, the intercom crackled again, and the captain's voice, authoritative and clear, rang out. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're starting our descent. Please make sure your seatbelts are fastened and your trays are upright. Cabin crew, prepare for landing." The usual flurry of activity began as passengers secured their seats and personal items. Jessica, the flight attendant who had attended to Emma earlier, returned to her row. She flashed a warm, albeit uneasy smile. "Anything I can get you before we land?" "Miss Carter." Emma shook her head with a polite smile. "Thank you, Jessica. You've been very kind." Jessica's cheeks flushed slightly at the compliment. "If there's anything you need, don't hesitate to ask," she said. Stepping away, Emma's calm demeanor reassured her, but the tension in the cabin was palpable. Samantha, in first class, hurried through the last checks before landing, her movements stiff, mechanical. She tried to keep her face neutral, but inside her mind was a storm of dread. The captain's earlier instructions and Emma's subtle but commanding words echoed in her mind. She could feel the eyes of Dennis and the other crew members on her, though no one spoke as the plane descended through the clouds. Emma glanced out the window, watching the city below her. Fingers rested lightly on the armrest, as composed as ever. Despite the turmoil, Samantha felt Emma seemed entirely in control, the journey unfolding exactly as she had predicted. The plane touched down smoothly, and a collective sigh of relief swept through the cabin as passengers unbuckled their seatbelts and retrieved their things from the overhead bins. The usual bustle filled the air, but for Samantha, a lingering tension clung to the moment. As the seatbelt sign switched off, Emma remained seated, her movement slow and deliberate. She retrieved her phone again and typed a brief message. "We've landed, be ready." She tucked the phone back into her bag and glanced toward the front of the plane, where Samantha stood near the exit. Their eyes met for a split second, and Samantha's stomach twisted in dread. The cabin doors opened, and cool air from the jet bridge began to drift inside. Passengers filed out in an orderly manner, the usual mix of casual conversation and luggage clinks filling the air. Samantha stood rigidly, forcing smiles for each person, her heart pounding as she waited for Emma to approach. But Emma didn't rush to join the line. Instead, she waited until the aisle was nearly empty before standing and gathering her things with the same careful poise she had shown all flight as she walked toward the exit. The remaining crew, Jessica Dennis and others, exchanged subtle glances. Everyone could feel that something significant was about to unfold. When Emma reached the exit, Samantha stood straighter, forcing herself to meet her gaze. "Thank you for flying with us, Miss Carter," she said, her voice a little shaky. Emma paused, her face neutral, but her eyes sharp. "I'm sure we'll be in touch," she said smoothly, her tone heavy with meaning, sending a chill through Samantha. Without another word, Emma stepped off the plane, leaving Samantha frozen in place. Dennis approached her slowly. "You okay?" he asked, though. His tone made it clear he already knew the answer. Samantha didn't reply. Her eyes stayed fixed on the open door, almost as if expecting someone or something to appear, and she wasn't wrong. Moments later, 2 uniformed security officers stepped onto the plane, their presence commanding instant attention. They scanned the cabin and then zeroed in on Samantha. "Are you Samantha Turner?" one of them asked. Samantha's breath caught. "Yes." She managed her voice, barely a whisper. "We need you to come with us," the officer said, his tone firm. "We have some questions about an incident on this flight." The blood drained from Samantha's face as the reality of the situation hit her. Dennis watched in silence as the officers escorted her off the plane, her rigid posture betraying her growing panic. The remaining crew exchanged nervous glances, unsure what would happen next outside the terminal. Emma stood near the gate, her phone in hand. She watched as Samantha was escorted away. Her face unreadable, the message she had sent had set everything in motion, and now it was all falling into place. Emma turned and walked toward the baggage claim, her steps measured and deliberate. She had no need to look back. The situation was unfolding exactly as she had planned inside the terminal. The energy buzzed as passengers from the flight dispersed, many of them casting curious glances at the unfolding scene. Whispers spread through the crowd, but no one approached Emma as she calmly made her way to baggage claim. Her movements remained composed, each one calculated as though she were already 2 steps ahead of everyone else. Meanwhile, Samantha sat in a small, cold room alone, with her thoughts waiting. The officers stood by the door, their faces impassive. Samantha's mind raced, trying to understand how things had escalated so quickly. She'd gone from being a respected flight attendant to the center of an investigation. In the blink of an eye, the realization hit her hard. This wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was a deliberate response. One of the officers finally broke the silence. "Miss Turner, we've been notified of an incident involving a first-class passenger on your flight. The airline's executive team has requested a full account of your actions." Samantha swallowed hard. Her throat felt dry and her voice trembled as she replied, I don't know what this is about. I was just doing my job." The officer raised an eyebrow. "According to the reports, the passenger you removed from first class was Emma Williams. Are you aware of her position?" Samantha's heart dropped. I didn't know at first," she admitted, barely audible. "I only found out during the flight." The officer leaned in, his eyes unwavering. "Miss Carter is not just a high-ranking executive for the airline, she's also a major shareholder. Her complaint has already been escalated to the board, and they take these matters very seriously." Samantha is face-turned action. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. The officer's tone grew colder. "Miss Carter's account has been documented, and other passengers have corroborated her version of events. We're giving you the opportunity to tell your side. But let me be clear, this will not be taken lightly." Samantha's hands shook as she gripped the edge of the table, desperate to explain herself. But the words wouldn't come deep down. She knew she couldn't justify her actions. She had acted on impulse, and now she was paying the price. Meanwhile, Emma stood by the baggage carousel, her phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was calm, but there was a firmness to it. "Yes, the security team has taken her in for questioning. Please make sure the board reviews the footage and statements." She listened for a moment before responding. "Good. Let's make sure this gets resolved thoroughly and professionally." As she ended the call, the first luggage pieces appeared on the conveyor belt. Emma effortlessly grabbed her sleek black suitcase and continued on her way. A few passengers from the flight eyed her with new respect, but she didn't acknowledge them, her attention solely on her next move. The airport's chaos seemed to part for her, as though she was already on her way to something bigger. Emma had turned an act of prejudice into an opportunity for accountability, and she wasn't done yet. Her quiet strength and strategy had paved the way for a reckoning, one that Samantha and the airline would not soon forget. Back in the holding room, Samantha sat, her breath shallow, overwhelmed by the weight of her actions. The officers gave her a moment to compose herself, but the silence felt suffocating. Each passing second made it harder to regain her focus. Finally, she spoke in a soft voice, barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean for this to happen." She hesitated. "I was just following protocol." Samantha couldn't bring herself to face the reality that her actions had been influenced by unconscious bias. I don't know," she stammered. She didn't act like the other passengers in first class. The officer exchanged a look with his partner before replying. "Not fitting the mold of other passengers isn't a reason to move someone to a different section, especially when they have a valid ticket. Did she break any rules? Did she violate any airline policies?" Samantha shook her head, her palms slick with sweat. "No," but the officer cut her off. "Then you acted without cause. Miss Carter was well within her rights to remain in her assigned seat, and now you've put the airline in a tough spot." The officer continued, and Samantha's heart sank as his words sank in. She wanted to argue to defend herself, but the undeniable truth was she had acted on nothing but assumptions, and now the consequences were here. Emma had just stepped out of the terminal, waiting at the curb for her car. A sleek black sedan pulled up, and the driver, dressed in an impeccable suit, opened the door for her. "Miss Carter," he greeted her with a nod of respect. "Everything is set up as you requested, thanks." "William," Emma replied, sliding into the back seat with her characteristic elegance inside. She took out her phone and began scanning her emails. A notification from the airline's board caught her eye, and she opened it right away. The email was short but clear. It outlined the steps the board would take to address the incident, including a review of the airline's training protocols and a commitment to holding Samantha accountable. Emma smiled faintly. Not with vengeance, but satisfaction. Revenge wasn't her goal. Her goal was accountability and reform, and it seemed she was already seeing results back at the airport. The officers had finished questioning Samantha as they prepared to leave. One of them made a final sharp remark. "This matter will be escalated to the airline's disciplinary committee," he said firmly. "You'll be notified of their decision shortly. In the meantime, you are suspended from duty." Samantha felt her stomach lurch as they left her alone with her thoughts. The weight of her situation began to settle in, and for the first time she realized how badly she had underestimated Emma Williams. At that very moment, Emma's car glided away from the terminal, blending into the busy city traffic. Emma sat back, her mind calm and composed. The day had been draining, but she felt a quiet satisfaction. She had stood firm, and in doing so, she had set the wheels of change in motion. Her phone buzzed, breaking her reverie. It was another message from the airline's board confirming that a full review of the incident would take place, along with new sensitivity training for staff. Emma read the message thoroughly before replying, "Good, let's make sure this never happens again." As the city skyline came into view, Emma leaned back in her seat, and Roberts softly, the chapter was closing. But she knew her actions that day would leave a lasting impact on the airline and hopefully on everyone working there. Meanwhile, Samantha sat alone in the small room long after the officers had left, staring blankly at the table in front of her. The weight of her suspension, the impending investigation, and the realization of what she had done pressed down on her. She replayed every decision she had made that day, each choice unraveling her confidence. What it felt like an instinctive judgment now seemed like a grave mistake. Her phone buzzed again, snapping her back to reality. She hesitated before picking it up, bracing herself for what she knew would be bad news. It was a message from HR Samantha. Please be prepared to attend a disciplinary hearing tomorrow at 9 a.m. Further details will follow by email. Her hand shook as she read the message, the weight of her actions crashing down on her. This wasn't just a formality. It was the airline's way of salvaging its reputation, and Samantha knew she was being made the scapegoat. She wanted to scream to fight back. But deep down, she understood there was nothing she could say to reverse the damage. Meanwhile, Emma's car pulled up to her. Office, a sleek building in the city's core. She stepped out with grace, her driver opening the door for her, inside her assistant. Ashley greeted her with a smile and handed over a stack of documents. "It's all here," Ashley said, passing her a folder. The folder contained the board's initial review of the incident statements from the crew and proposed changes to the training programs they were moving quickly. Emma nodded thoughtfully as she flipped through the documents. "They know this can't be ignored," she said, her tone calm, the covering their bases. "But at least it's a start." Ashley paused before speaking. "Do you think she'll fight back the flight attendant?" "I mean," Emma thought for a moment before responding. "Maybe," she said, closing the folder, "but it's not about her anymore. It's about the system that allowed someone like her to make decisions based on prejudice. That's the real issue." Ashley nodded, admiration clear in her eyes. "You've already made a difference. The board is taking this seriously because of you?" Emma smiled briefly but said nothing. She knew this work was far from over. Systemic change took time, patience, and a relentless commitment, and Emma had all three back at the airport. Samantha finally stood up, her legs unsteady as she left the holding room. She avoided the eyes of the officers and airport staff as she walked toward the employee exit. The walk to her car felt like a long, silent march of shame. Her uniform, once a symbol of her career, now felt like a heavy burden sitting in a car. Samantha stared at the steering wheel, her mind spinning. She had spent years building a reputation as a competent, dedicated flight attendant, and now it was all crumbling. She thought about Emma, calm, poised, and untouchable. The realization hit Samantha like a punch. Emma had been in control the entire time. Emma had maintained control from the moment Samantha made her first mistake. For the first time, Samantha allowed herself to feel something other than frustration or anger, a deep, knowing regret. Settled in her chest, she had underestimated Emma not just as a passenger, but as a person, and now she was facing the consequences as Samantha drove away from the airport. Emma sat in her office reviewing the documents Ashley had given her. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from the airline CEO requesting a personal meeting to discuss the incident. And next steps, Emma typed a brief reply. "I'll make time tomorrow. Let's make sure this gets resolved properly." She set her phone down and leaned back in her chair. Already thinking ahead, the events of the day had been draining, but Emma knew they had opened a door, an opportunity to reshape the culture of an entire organization for Emma. This was a battle worth fighting. The morning sun streamed through the blinds in her office, casting long shadows across her desk as she prepared for the meeting with the airline executives. She had spent the night reviewing documents, drafting statements, and contemplating the broader implications of the incident to Emma. This wasn't just about addressing her personal experience. It was about setting a precedent that no one, regardless of their position or background, should ever have to endure the kind of treatment she did. At exactly 10:00 a.m., her assistant Ashley escorted James Roberts, the CEO, into the room. James was a tall, imposing man in his late 50s with silver-streaked hair and a polished demeanor. Despite his confident exterior, there was an undeniable tension in his posture as he extended his hand to Emma. "Miss Carter, thank you for agreeing to meet on such short notice." James began, his voice measured and polite. Emma shook his hand with a calm yet resolute expression. "I appreciate you taking the situation seriously, Mr. Roberts," she replied. "Please have a seat," she added, gesturing to the chair across from her. James sat down, adjusting his tie before continuing. "First, let me express my deepest apologies for what happened on your flight. It was completely unacceptable, and we are committed to ensuring that this doesn't happen again." Emma nodded, her gaze unwavering. "I'm glad to hear that." However, she added, her voice, steady apologies alone won't fix the underlying problems. This isn't just about one flight attendant making a poor decision. It's about the culture that allowed her to feel justified in that decision. James's face tightened slightly, but he nodded in agreement. "You're absolutely right. That's why we've already initiated a full review of our policies and training programs we're implementing. Mandatory sensitivity and bias training for all staff, and we'll be revisiting our internal reporting processes to ensure better accountability." Emma leaned back in her chair, studying him carefully for a moment. "It's a start," she said, "but it's not enough. I want a detailed timeline for these changes, as well as regular updates on their progress, and I expect to see measurable results." James hesitated, then nodded. "Of course, we'll provide you with everything you need." Emma allowed a small satisfied smiled across her lips. "Good, let's make sure this becomes a turning point for your organization, not just a one-time fix." The meeting went on for another hour, with Emma laying out her expectations while James took careful notes. By the time the meeting ended, there was a clear sense of purpose in the room. As James stood to leave, he extended his hand again. This time there was genuine respect in his eyes. "Thank you for holding us accountable," he said. "We'll make this right." Emma shook his hand firmly. "I'll hold you to that." As James left the room, Ashley entered, her eyes bright with curiosity. "How did it go?" Emma X. Roberts is a mix of relief and determination in her voice. "It went well, but this is just the beginning." Meanwhile, while Emma's meeting was in progress, Samantha sat in a sterile conference room at the airline's headquarters, waiting for her disciplinary hearing to begin. The weight of her suspension hung over Samantha like a dark cloud, and the silence in the room only deepened her anxiety. A stack of papers sat before her, each one detailing her actions during the flight, along with the complaints filed by Emma Williams. The door opened, and a panel of 3 senior airline executives entered. Their expressions, neutral but stern. One of them, a woman with sharp features and a commanding presence, spoke first. "Miss Turner, thank you for coming. We're here to discuss the incident on Flight 507 and the allegations made against you." Samantha nodded weakly, her throat dry. "I understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The executives began reviewing the timeline of events, asking Samantha to explain what had happened. She tried to justify her actions, but her words felt hollow even to herself. "I thought she might have been in the wrong seat," Samantha said, her voice faltering. "Protocol?" the sharp-featured executive asked. Raising an eyebrow, "According to our records, Miss Carter had a valid first-class ticket." "When did you verify this before asking her to move?" Samantha hesitated, her palms slick with sweat. I didn't," she admitted quietly. The room fell into a heavy silence, her admission hanging in the air like a heavy weight. Another executive, a middle-aged man with glasses, leaned forward. "Miss Turner, the airline has a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. Your actions not only violated that policy, but they also jeopardized our reputation. Do you understand the severity of this situation?" Samantha nodded slowly, her heart sinking. "I do." The panel continued questioning her, the tone professional but unyielding. By the time the hearing ended, Samantha felt utterly defeated. The final decision would be communicated to her in writing, but she already knew the outcome. Her career with the airline was over. As Samantha left the room, she couldn't help but think of Emma, the composed woman who had maintained her dignity even when Samantha had taken it away. For the first time, Samantha felt the full weight of her actions, not just the impact on her career, but on the person she had wronged, and as much as she wanted to blame the system or her instincts, she knew the truth: she had made a choice, and now she was facing the consequences. Later that afternoon, Emma sat in her office sipping a cup of tea as she reviewed an email from the airline's board. The tone of the email was clear. They were eager to demonstrate their commitment to reform. Attached was a timeline of the planned changes Emma had requested, including mandatory training and revisions to their complaint handling procedures. It was a small but significant victory, and Emma allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Her phone buzzed, pulling her attention away from the screen. It was a message from Ashley. "Samantha Turner has been officially terminated. Thought you'd want to know." Emma set her cup down, slowly staring at the message. It didn't bring her joy, nor did it feel like a true resolution. Emma wasn't vindictive by nature, and she knew Samantha's dismissal was just a symptom of a larger problem, yet it was a necessary step in an acknowledgement that actions had consequences. Emma leaned back in a chair, reflecting on the whirlwind of events over the past 24 hours. Her decision to act decisively had been driven by more than just personal affront. It was about setting an example, not just for the airline, but for anyone who might find themselves in her position. Emma picked up her phone and typed a quick reply to Ashley. "Thanks for letting me know. Let's keep focusing on the bigger picture." That evening, Samantha sat in her small apartment, the termination notice from the airline resting on the table in front of her. She had spent hours replaying the hearing in her mind, hoping to find some justification for her actions. But there was none. The reality was stark and undeniable. Her assumptions, fueled by prejudice, had cost her everything. Her friends and family had started to reach out their messages, a mix of sympathy and judgment. Samantha couldn't bring herself to respond. She felt isolated, trapped by the weight of her mistakes. For years, she had prided herself on being a competent professional, someone who followed the rules and did her job well. But now all of that seemed meaningless. She turned on the television, hoping to distract herself. But the first thing she saw was a news segment about bias in the workplace. It was as though the universe was forcing her to confront her actions. The segment featured an interview with Emma Williams, who spoke eloquently about the importance of systemic change and holding organizations accountable. Samantha stared at the screen, her chest tightening. Emma's calm demeanor and articulate words stood in stark contrast to Samantha's own inner turmoil. For the first time, Samantha didn't see Emma as an adversary, but as someone who had every right to demand better for herself and for others. Turning off the TV, Samantha sat in silence, knowing she couldn't undo what she had done, but maybe, just maybe, she could learn from it. She reached for her laptop and began typing an email Samantha sat at her desk, staring at the screen of her laptop as she typed an email to the airline's board. But this time her focus wasn't on defending herself. Instead, she wrote a heartfelt apology, not just to Emma, but to everyone affected by her actions. For the first time in days, Samantha felt a glimmer of clarity. She couldn't change the past, but she could choose how to move forward. The following week, Emma received an unexpected email. It was forwarded to her by the airline's board with the subject line "Apology from former staff." Curious, Emma opened it and began to read. The message was from Samantha Turner, and it began with a simple acknowledgement of her mistakes. "Miss Carter, I owe you an apology. My actions on that flight were inexcusable. I acted on assumptions rather than facts, and I failed to see you for who you are, a valued passenger, and more importantly, a person who deserved respect. My behavior reflected poorly not only on me, but on the airline as a whole. For that, I am truly sorry." Emma read the email, carefully noting the tone of sincerity. Samantha continued to explain how the aftermath of the incident had forced her to reflect deeply on her actions and their consequences. She admitted to her biases and expressed her intention to educate herself and become a better person. This experience has been humbling, and I've come to understand that the changes you are advocating for are desperately needed not just in this airline, but everywhere. I hope my actions, though wrong, can serve as an example of what must change. I'm committed to learning and to never repeating such a mistake. Thank you for holding me accountable. Emma leaned back in her chair after finishing the email, her thoughts swirling. She wasn't naive. She knew people often apologize to alleviate their guilt or to salvage their reputation. But something about Samantha's words felt genuine, and Emma couldn't ignore that. After a moment's pause, she drafted a brief response. Thank you for your message. Accountability is the first step toward growth. I hope you continue on this path and use this experience to create positive change in the future. Hitting send. Emma closed her laptop and gazed out the window. For her, the incident wasn't just about personal justice. It was about creating a ripple effect, and while Samantha's apology didn't erase what had happened, it hinted at the possibility of change. It was a small step, but Emma knew that even small steps could lead to something greater. Weeks passed, and the ripple effects of the incident on Flight 507 were beginning to take hold. The airline had rolled out its first series of mandatory sensitivity and bias training sessions for all staff, a move that was announced publicly alongside a statement of accountability. Emma's role in pushing for these changes was highlighted subtly but respectfully in the announcement, positioning her not as an antagonist, but as a catalyst for progress. The changes sparked conversations across the aviation industry. Other airlines began reviewing their policies, and several reached out to Emma directly for guidance. She declined most offers, focusing instead on ensuring that her efforts with this airline were fully realized. Her work wasn't about personal accolades, it was about creating lasting impact. One afternoon, Emma found herself back at the airport, preparing to board a flight for a business meeting. As she approached the gate, she noticed a subtle shift in the way the staff interacted with passengers. Smiles were genuine, and every question was answered with patience and care. It wasn't perfect. No system ever was, but it was better, and that was a start. When Emma reached the gate, the agent recognized her immediately. "Miss Carter, welcome back. We've upgraded your seat as a token of our appreciation for your continued support," they said warmly. Emma smiled, appreciating the gesture, but waved it off politely. "That's kind of you, but I'm fine where I am," she replied. Her confidence and humility, as always, drew respect without demanding it as she boarded the plane. Emma noticed subtle changes in the way the crew carried themselves. They seemed more attentive, more engaged with the passengers. She took her seat quietly, observing the flow of the cabin as people settled in across the aisle. A young woman struggled to find space for her bag in the overhead compartment. Almost instinctively, a flight attendant stepped in to help her, their tone warm and reassuring. It reminded Emma of Jessica, the one attendant during her ordeal who had shown her kindness. Emma had ensured Jessica's professionalism was highlighted in her discussions with the board, and Jessica had since been promoted to a senior role. Emma spotted her near the front of the cabin, supervising the boarding process with a steady, confident demeanor. Jessica caught Emma's eye and smiled, a look of gratitude passing between them. Emma nodded back subtly, an unspoken acknowledgement of shared respect. It was moments like this that reminded Emma why she had pushed so hard for change. Small gestures multiplied over time could transform an entire culture. As the plane took off, Emma leaned back in her seat, reflecting on the journey she had taken. Not just the flight, but everything that had followed. She thought about Samantha's apology, the systemic reforms, and the messages of support she had received from strangers who'd heard her story. It was humbling and empowering all at once, somewhere in another part of the city. Samantha was also embarking on her own journey. She had taken a job with a nonprofit organization dedicated to workplace diversity and inclusion, using her experience as a case study for change. It wasn't an easy path, and Samantha knew she had much to prove, but it gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt before for the first time in her life. Samantha was looking beyond herself determined to contribute to something larger as the plane cruised at 30,000 feet. Emma pulled out her notebook, flipping to a blank page. She wrote down a single line change, begins with accountability, but it thrives on persistence. Closing the notebook, she allowed herself a rare moment of peace. Gazing out the window at the endless expanse of clouds, she knew the fight wasn't over. There was still so much work to do. But as she watched to the sky stretch endlessly before her, Emma felt something she hadn't expected. The events of that flight had been painful, but they had sparked something much bigger than her. And in that moment, Emma knew with quiet certainty that the sky was not the limit. It was just the beginning.